This particular question revolves around a piecewise function, which has already been selected correctly here. And the domain has already been correctly identified as being from 1 to 7. And just as a quick recap, that domain would be all of the x values of the points involved in this graph. So the lowest being 1, the highest being 7, and then of course everything in between. So you can see that domain, kind of can see it right here listed from 1 to 7 inclusive. The next couple of questions ask about absolute and local maximums and minimums. So we'll start with absolute. So an absolute maximum is the highest y value that exists in this graph. So you're literally looking for the highest point. And that happens right here at this point. Now we would say that that is the point, let's see, 3, 7. But writing that into a function notation, we would write it like this, that with an input of 3, we get an output of 7. So f of 3 equals 7. The absolute minimum is, again, the lowest point. And you can see here's the lowest point on this particular graph. And so as a point, we would state that as 7, -5. And in a function notation form, we write f of the input equals the output. F of x equals y, in other words. And then the next couple of questions ask about local max and min. So there's this small condition with local max and min that you would not want to consider endpoints for local max and local min. So what I mean by endpoints is endpoints of the entire domain. So I would not want to consider 1 and 7, but anything in between that is a maximum. And again, the local max is the same thing as the absolute max. So we're going to label this point as both the local and absolute max. So again, you would list this equation, f of 3 equals 7 for the local max. And then for local minimum, I would not want to consider this point for the local minimum because it's at the end point of the domain. Instead, look within the function. Is there a place that's a minimum within the graph? And that happens here. At this point, there is a minimum. You see that the points surrounding it are higher. So it like dips down right here. That is the point 2, 0. So we would write, again, in function notation, f of 2 equals 0 as a local min. And again, this one was the absolute min. And that's how those two were different.